This episode is brought to you by Pluralsight. Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a long-awaited, very special guest, James O'Keefe, head of Project Veritas. His books include American Muckraker. Damn it, I feel like John Fetterman. His books include American Muckraker and American Pravda. Leave that in. James, welcome to the show. I think you and I should have a little bit of an argument over which one of us has more contempt for the corporate press, me or you.
Well, that's an argument we could certainly have.
How badly do you think, because you're very known for having these kind of hidden camera videos where you're exposing people who saying things that their corporate overlords would otherwise not let them say, things that are kind of impolitic and so on and so forth. And then there's a lot of hand waving and acting like, oh, well, they don't mean it, or this person doesn't really matter, or they're just not repeating, the company position, all this other typical BS. Can you explain to viewers at home the difference between how corporate journalists present themselves when they're in a professional setting in front of the camera versus what they're like when they're in a more relaxed context?
The difference between how they project themselves on TV and who they actually are. Well, most of them are probably suffer from narcissistic personality disorder or some version of that. And most of them are in it for the power and the clout and so forth and so on. You've seen that in our stories like on Charlie Chester, the CNN individual who's the control room director at CNN, right? And he was bragging about their propaganda. You might say, why would a guy brag to a girl about how much of a propagandist that he is? So there's that kind of thing that we see, but certainly a difference between how they project themselves publicly versus privately. Also, Matt Rosenberg, the New York Times reporter, remember him? And he said that he got woke colleagues at the New York Times who were effing dweebs on January 6th who go on and on, I'm quoting him, about their trauma. Give me a break, he says. But again, none of these New York Times reporters have the courage to say these things publicly. And it's the lack of courage to say these things publicly. Many of them are not saying bad things, but they're not willing to state the truth publicly. I read this morning in the Wall Street Journal a quote, which I want to read to you. This is about the John Durham investigation of the FBI. This is Wall Street Journal columnist quote. Our media doesn't believe the important question right now is it true? The important question is the truth pro-Trump or not? So they've sort of suspended these fundamental beliefs in the First Amendment or reality in order to achieve a political objective. It's a cliche, but it's gotten really bad in the last couple of years, and it's sort of happening everywhere now.
Let's have this argument, because this is one we all have, I think, people at least who travel in circles that you and I travel in, which is, has it gotten bad, or have we just gotten better at seeing it? So, for example, if when we're growing up, you become an adult, and as you become an adult, you would think to yourself, wow, a lot more people are drinking and fooling around than when I was a kid. Well, it's like, no, when you were a kid, they kept these things from you, and now you're in situations where you're aware of them. Before social media and the internet and camera phones, you would have 4 networks for the nightly news, and they'd be four variants of progressivism, and they'd sit and they'd smile, and you'd think you have a choice, but it would be very, very limited in what kind of perspectives were presented as the news. And we all learned in high school about the Spanish-American War, remember the Maine, and how we were led into war by the newspapers. Then there's this kind of record scratch, and all of a sudden the newspaper is supposed to be decent upholders of morality. So I'm very much torn as to whether they've gotten worse or whether they've gotten sloppier. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that journalism, let me start by saying, from my recent book, American Muckraker, journalists have a very important role in society to build some type of moral consensus. And we are just more, I think, probably true, more morally divided than we've ever been. We're disagreeing on everything. But journalists have a responsibility to bring people together by exposing what is true. And if their premise is it doesn't matter what is true, it just matters whether it hurts Trump or not, I think that's damaging the moral fabric of our country. I don't think we're as divided as the media portrays. I think we're still united about many things. You can't discriminate against someone on the basis of religion. That was a premise behind a story we did recently. People generally think that they care about their children. I think we're usually united on that front, and we're generally united on the First Amendment. But I think it has gotten worse, Mike. I think just my reading of history in the 60s and 70s and 80s and the sort of journalism that was done, whether it was Chicago Sun-Times doing undercover work, or Diane Sawyer going into the grocery stores, or Mike Wallace, realize he's dead, but he used to confront people with the microphone, stick it up their nose, go into boardrooms, and they'd be shocked. You just don't see that anymore. You don't see, I realized there was J. Edgar Hoover extorting people decades ago, but I do think that we don't have the same investigative, adversarial kind of investigative reporting that we used to have. And if there isn't that, if it's New York Times national security reporters who say, prosecutors say, quoting the prosecutor, and if we don't have people skeptical of what the prosecutors are saying, or publishing what they don't say, or what they won't say, then we have a population who's maybe not getting the information that they need, and therefore we become more divided. So I think the Fourth Estate has that important role that they used to play a little more than they currently do.
Well, let me push back a little bit about this. I'm a little bit older than you, but I remember very vividly in the mid-90s when President Clinton was undergoing his impeachment trial, and he was being on trial on charges of, I think it's witness tampering, obstruction of justice, certain prosecutorial felonies. And I think it was ABC News at the time had an interview with Juanita Broaddrick. And Juanita Broaddrick had a very credible rape claim against President Clinton. I've had her on my show. She detailed it pretty specifically. She did admit she brought him back to her room, and so on and so forth. So there's pictures of them together. So it wasn't something concocted out of whole cloth, as we saw, kind of recently, where I forget the woman's name, was on Anderson Cooper saying that President Donald Trump at the time had forcefully raped her in the dressing room at Barney's. Which would have been a lot more difficult to and now you bring this up, and the Anderson Cooper is just sitting there smiling and nodding as she talks about women have rape fantasies. Point being, they explicitly said, we are going to sit on this story so that it doesn't affect the impeachment. So we're talking about at least 30 years now where they're comfortable hiding massive stories in order to force a political outcome that they find desirable.
Yeah, they used to do it before. They did it. There's a book I read about, talking about JFK and his coziness with, I think it was then the legendary editor Ben Bradley of the Washington Post. These things have existed throughout time. But two things can be true. There was a coziness with the Democratic Party, and also there was adversarial journalism, more of which existed in the past than does now. And Noam Chomsky wrote about this in Manufacturing Consent in the 80s. He called it, and again, people say, "Oh, KEEFE, you agree with Noam Chomsky?" Well, on this I do. Yeah. There's a shared reciprocity, and it's easier for corporations to trust these powerful agents than to be skeptical of them. And there was, I think, a more philanthropic desire from these for-profit companies back in the day, 40, 50 years ago, to take a loss on their balance sheet and to do tough work that cost them something. As far as I understand, the last 5 to 10 years, ABC News has axed their entire investigative reporting division. So the world has changed. People are willing to take less movies don't take the risks they took in the 1990s.
Right.
When you watch Good Morning America, they're selling you Marvel's Avengers products and crap. They're not giving you reporting, and I think they used to. So I think that both things can be true, right? There was always a Democratic media complex, particularly with Clinton, but there was a willingness, and there just were more newspapers. There was less consolidation of media, and I think that's why things have gotten worse.
Do you have, there's something else I think people don't appreciate, because I think we're growing up on this kind of WWF version of politics where people genuinely believe that every Republican hates every Democrat, and the journalists who are being very kind of adversarial towards Trump. They kind of have their team, and they don't throw people under the bus to further their interests behind the scenes. I know Cernovich, talks frequently about how Maggie Haberman is one of Jared and Ivanka's biggest kind of conduits to the press. She has a very cozy relationship with President Trump, despite working for the New York Times and being somewhat critical of him. Can you speak to, from your personal experience, I'm guessing you have plenty of journalists who are sliding into your DMs and sending you emails who are perfectly comfortable throwing their colleagues or their organizations under the bus, even though very clearly they would be regarded politically as somehow on the left or aligned with the Democratic Party. Is that true?
Throwing their colleagues under the bus, you mean speaking on background with me, or how do you mean?
That's exactly what I mean. Meaning, like, they have no problem coming to you if they see something that they would, either they genuinely find wrong, or they just want to create mischief for someone that they personally
I think
dislike.
they're many of these people that work in this industry, that would require them having conscience, and some of them do. But a lot of them, they talk a big game about the public's right to know, but the honest ones it's just a profession. But we have people who've come to us and privately, whether wittingly or unwittingly, and Rosenberg was unwitting. He didn't know that he was being recorded. He was speaking to a stranger. For example, Rosenberg, this is the New York Times national security reporter, Pulitzer Prize winner, told our undercover journalist, quote, "We fucked up on that James O'Keefe defamation lawsuit." It's an extraordinary admission, by the way. But he said this unwittingly to someone. Would he send me a DM and say that? Probably not. But a lot of people say things unwittingly. And let's face it, you're more honest when you don't know that you're speaking on the record or even on background. I think probably there's a deterring effect with me and an irony in speaking to me on background or off the record, because I secretly record people for a living. So they're probably not going to tell me these things when they know that I'll probably publish them. But sure, we have whistleblowers coming to us right now inside the media and the federal government. We're in process on that. And I think that there's a tension in journalism between access and autonomy. Journalists have to be cozy with their sources to get information, but they also have to be independent enough and adversarial enough. And if you're too adversarial, that engenders biases on their own. You're speaking to your ideological audience like the New York Times does. So you have to find that cozy in between. In other words, you have to be fair and you have to be honest. And I think journalism is skewed way too far in the direction of being cozy with your sources, which has become a perversion in outlets like the New York Times.
You brought up your lawsuit with the New York Times. Obviously, discussing a lawsuit is something that is kind of tricky. But I do want to ask you about what was the basis of this lawsuit and what is the current status insofar as you're able to speak about it publicly.
Yeah, and I'm drinking Red Bull, which I usually don't drink, but I had a red-eye flight and I was doing a story in Arizona. So here we are in time for your interview, barely, back at headquarters in New York. Yeah, I'm open to discuss anything. Pretty transparent about this. We sued the New York Times for defamation because they did a front page story late September 2020 saying that we were part of a, quote, coordinated disinformation campaign, according to experts. The first sentence of the article said, "A deceptive video released by Project Veritas with no verifiable evidence of voter fraud and no proof of any of this." They reported these things when the video that we released clearly showed a Somali man on videos with all these ballots on his lap in the state of Minnesota where he lived. It's illegal to have more than 3 that you're harvesting. So the video was very clear and incontrovertible, right? And the New York Times said that it was no proof of anything, and I was a coordinated disinformation campaign. So I sued them for defamation, and the judge ordered the lawsuit continue beyond motion to dismiss, which is very rare.
Yes.
A lawsuit against the New York Times.
There's just so people for background, to interrupt you, but there's an enormous asymmetry in our legal system. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing to defend, journalists and media outlets. Otherwise, whenever they write a story that someone's not going to like, they're going to get sued. So the fact that you got this forward meant they really crossed the line, in my opinion.
And then they doubled down and had like 12 to 15 front page hit pieces. They're obsessed with Project Veritas. They won't stop talking about us. And we've got multiple national security reporters at the New York Times coordinating with the federal government to hurt me. And it's that sort of injustice and that sort of power nexus, which is so anathema to what journalism is. So this lawsuit clearly scares the shit out of them. They went judge shopping to try to appeal it. But the reality is that the judge in the Supreme Court of the state of New York ruled last March of 21. He said the disinformation was actually the New York Times, because the New York Times' defense in court was that, Your Honor, this is just our opinion.
No, on the front page?
On the front page. Yeah, they said this is an opinion. And then the judge said, well, why did you, this is the judge asking them, why did you mask your opinion? Your news article was used by Facebook to ban James O'Keefe's video, and now your defense is that it's just your opinion? You can see the vortex of propaganda in work. They say it's an opinion. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, uses the New York Times as their fact-checking mechanism. The video gets banned. Notifications get sent out to 50 million users that James O'Keefe is fake propaganda. And the New York Times argues in court under oath, it's our opinion. Now, the judge ruled against them. That's good news. The New York Times appealed that to the Supreme Court of New York, and the New York Times, and they actually said this. Lawyers for the New York, maybe they thought no one would read the pleadings, but we read them and make YouTube videos. They said that the words deception and verifiable have no precise meaning in the English language that is readily understood. That's what the New York Times said about their reporting. So this is what we have to deal with. It's right out of 1984. It's New York Times making these arguments, and we're going to win this lawsuit, and we're going to depose the New York Times soon, within a matter of months, within the year, and we're going to post those deposition tapes to YouTube, which is what they really fear. I've been deposed a dozen times. There's nothing for me to fear. I'll answer any question. I've got nothing to hide except for the identity of our sources and some of our donors. That's a First Amendment right. They have everything to hide. By making boneheaded statements like that under oath on video, it's going to embarrass the hell out of them.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. We have a new sponsor with amazing extreme altitude wines from the Bonner Private Wine Partnership. I just put out a bottle of their 9,000-foot Malbec the other evening at a dinner party I had, and everyone seemed to like it. It's grilling season, and the flavors go great with any meat you're going to have. They're unlike any wine you've ever tasted. Blackberry, leather, smoke, and a little dark cherry. These wines are almost impossible to get on your own because the producers deep in the Andes Mountains make limited quantity. The best part? They've cut out the middleman. No large markup. Today, I have an amazing introductory offer. If you visit bonnerprivatewines.com/Michael, you'll not only get wine for over 50% off plus free shipping, you'll also get a bonus bottle of small batch, limited production wine from their exclusive wine cellar. 4 bottles for the price of 3. It's a deal that's hard to turn down if you're a wine lover like so many of you out there. Just visit Bonner, B-O-N-N-E-R, bonnerprivatewines.com/Michael to claim your bonus bottle and become a part of America's most unique wine club. Let's get back to the show. So you said it's like 1984, and this is one of the reasons I'm so hopeful about the future of this country, because for them, it is like 1984, not the book, but the era. They seem to be living, and many other outlets like the New York Times seem to be living in this world where they have a monopoly control of the mic, where information has to come to the masses through them, that they're basically this gatekeepers or filters, and they could put out whatever information you want. Think about if it's 1984, if the New York Times comes after James O'Keefe, there is no possibility for James O'Keefe really to kind of present his point of view. Maybe you go the New York Post or something, but certainly in terms of power dynamics, the article against James in the New York Times versus the Post or some newsletter you sent out is going to be enormous asymmetry. Now, someone can go on Twitter, can go on YouTube. When I put my books out on Amazon that I produce myself, it's equal. It's the same page. It's the same possibility for anyone to click and watch the video. And the fact that you're on a level playing field with these people is an enormous threat to them, because other than the brand name, which is not nothing, why am I trusting this article from this source as opposed to this source, as opposed to, I don't care who's putting it out. I want the facts. And this is an enormous threat to their business model, in my opinion.
Well, they ask you to trust them by virtue of their own decree that they ought to be trusted.
Yes, yeah.
There's a guy named Jay Rosen who wrote, he's an NYU journalism professor.
Oh, he's horrible.
But I agree with him on one thing he said. He said, when you're a journalist and you use an anonymous source, you're withdrawing from your ATM. You're making a withdrawal on your reputational currency. When you don't use an anonymous source, that is to say, like when you actually show documents, like, maybe video of people doing the thing, you're depositing into your bank account. But if all you do is make withdrawals and say, according to people familiar with the matter, hey, guess what? I don't trust that. I don't trust people familiar with the matter. I don't know who these people are. I don't know if they said what they said. I don't know if you're doctoring the quotes, if you're using hyperbole, mendacious innuendo. When you only, and by the way, the New York Times did a story on Trump's tax returns, which was the day after our ballot harvesting story. And they didn't show any sources on the record. They didn't quote, you didn't see anybody's lips moving. You didn't even see a single document.
Yeah.
And the New York Times says, according to people familiar with the matter, I don't trust you because you just defamed me, and then under oath, you lie. You contradicted yourself. And now you're caught red-handed. So how many other, Mike, I mean, this is one lawsuit. How many other thousands of times in this country have people been defamed? And I'm a public figure. That means I have to prove actual malice in court of law. How many tens of thousands of people have been defamed, but they have no redress, they have no money, they don't have the will, the $1 million it takes to get to a jury trial. And you begin to question everything that you are told by these newspapers. In fact, funny anecdote, I've confronted many of these New York Times reporters, like 60 Minutes does, but one guy, Adam Goldman is his name.
Do you remember what President Bush said about him?
What was that?
He was at a baseball game with Dick Cheney, I think right when he was sworn in. He goes, see that over there? It's Adam Goldman, major league asshole for the New York Times.
He said
that? Cheney goes, oh yeah, big time. And he had to apologize because it was a hot mic.
I did not know that. Is that on YouTube or something? I'd love to
yes.
see. Adam Goldman, New York Times reporter, he won't engage in conversation. They send emails at the last second. They don't want to talk to you. They don't even care what you say. They've already written your thing. And the one time he walked up to me was when I was in federal court last month at a jury trial inside a federal building where I cannot record. Right? It's illicit to record video or audio inside a courtroom. Then he walked up to me, right? Because he's in his lair. He's like the mushroom in the dark. He talks to me inside the federal building because he knows I can't record the events in question, and he can describe them as he wishes. So the good news is these people are scared of sunlight.
Yes.
They're afraid of conversation. People like conversations like the one we're having right now. They hate that. And I think ultimately rock beats scissors. Videotape and reality beats propaganda every time.
The other thing, which I think is very effective in terms of what you are presenting as your view of the media, is Twitter. Because when you and I were kids, and probably everyone listening to this, when you hear the expression New York Times reporter or Harvard law professor, you have a certain idea of heft, of gravitas. This person might have a certain ideology, but they have worked hard. They're the brightest among us. And at the very least, they earn a certain amount of deference and respect. And then you look at their Twitter and you see that they are tweeting the same way as everyone's stupid uncle, just in all caps and with emojis, just basic generic ideological blather. You realize, wait a minute, these are not impressive people. These are people with an impressive credential, but that only will take you so far.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to fight. We at Veritas have had to fight for every result that we get, and it's usually a resignation, or it's despite our reputation on Wikipedia and with the powers that be. And these journalists again rely upon the fact that they're trusted because they say they are the credible sources. There was one guy named Jacob Bagaj on CNN who was dripping with hubris when Anderson Cooper asked him about the story. It's on our website. It's amazing to watch. He goes, well, credible journalists, Anderson, incredible, according to credible journalists. It's dripping with condescending hubris. They depend so much on their own declarations that they're credible. And I just think it's more exciting to show people the reality. I think it's more fun for you to see the facts and the evidence. People want that. People are drawn to believe the evidence of their eyes and ears. And as George Orwell said or as Winston said, the protagonist in 1984, which by the way was the year I was born, I think that's quite prophetic. Winston said, the party asks you to reject the evidence of your own eyes and ears. Right. That is the party's most essential commandment, that you don't trust your own eyes. And I just think that I have a fundamental belief in a free people, that if they're given access to raw information, that they will trust it.
Do you know what so the basis for that in 1984 anecdote you just told is something that I don't know if it's literally a basis, but it is something that the Soviets joked about even as early as the 1930s. So in Soviet culture, there's something called anekdote, which are little jokes you tell, but these jokes often have a punchline that tells a truth that you cannot speak publicly, otherwise you're going to get in trouble. And the joke is the Russian president, I think it was Kalinin at the time, is giving a speech about how there's all these amazing new skyscrapers on Karl Marx Street. And one of the workers in the audience gets up and raises his hand and goes, "Comrade, I walk on Karl Marx Street every day. There's no skyscrapers there." He goes, "Hey, maybe if you read a newspaper, you'd learn something instead of looking outside, like on the street with your own eyes." So like that mindset was even being made fun of in the Soviet Union, 90 years ago, and very little has changed. And is it it seems to me almost, I almost feel bad for them, how incompetent they are at trying to push people away from watching your content. This kind of like, "Oh, no, don't look at it. It's all made up." It's like,
right.
It's a video. It's
evidently not working. I mean, we're in the suburbs of New York, and last week 1010 Wins, CBS News. These are the radio stations mothers listen to when they drop their kids off at school. These are the most listened to radio stations in America. 1010 Wins. We give you 22 minutes. We'll give you the world. They were reporting at the top of the hour that Mayor Adams fired this aide that we caught on tape. The aide called Mayor Adams corrupt and was mocking first responders for not being vaccinated. He said, "Fuck them if they didn't get the vaccine," and Mayor Adams fired him. So we're still able to break through kind of. There's a glitch in the matrix. We're able to get a reaction by virtue of the fact that they fire the person. And then what Mayor Adams' spokesperson said is, "Well, O'Keefe's a liar and doctor's tapes, but we're firing this guy." And if you look at the comments, even their supporters, there's a local TV station in New York called WPix 11. These are all lefties. And they're like, "It doesn't make sense." This is what they were saying on television. "It doesn't make sense for you to call Veritas liars, but then fire the guy for saying the thing that O'Keefe is reporting that he said." It just doesn't make it's almost like pouring water on a robot. They malfunction, and that's how we're able to I guess bridge the divide, because we are so divided. But in a strange way, we're kind of bringing people together, because to watch all these lefty pundits go at each other's throats trying to make sense of this irrational thing, I think that sort of journalism, actually brings people together. It shows people, you point out the Soviet Union. I wrote a book called American Pravda,
right.
And I don't probably know as much as you, but I read a little bit. I read Solzhenitsyn, and it struck me that in the Soviet Union, people knew they were being lied to, and they privately joked about it. Would you say that was a fair characterization of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s?
Oh, well, it got worse and worse. So the concept was you had something called public truths and public lies and private truths. So everyone, including at the very top, you would go out there and you'd say what you need. It was like Veep, right? You go out there, and when you're in front of the cameras, you're in front of the people, this is great, everything's working, so on and so forth. And you get home and you're just like, oh God, it was work. It was basically work. In fact, Reagan, one of his things that he did, he's almost like a Grandpa Simpson character. I read him a lot about him in my next book. What he would do is he would take these Russian jokes, and then he would tell them in American audiences, and some of it would be broadcast in the Soviet Union. And it was a very effective way to subvert their propaganda, because it's using humor. He's the smiling old man. And one example is there was this big farm, and the commissar comes and he looks at the farm and he goes, "How is the wheat, farm man?" And the farmer's like, "Oh, comrade, the wheat, it's this, it's from here to Siberia." He goes, "Okay, what about the potatoes?" "Oh, the potatoes, comrade, if we stacked all the potatoes in this year's yield, it would reach the foot of God." And the commissar goes, "This is the Soviet Union. There is no God here." And he goes, "That's okay. We don't have any potatoes." So, but he's using humor to point out that we can't feed our people. So you see, you laugh, but it lets that knife in through the guard. And that was very much and it's that way, I also did a book on North Korea. I was in there, and it's very much this idea of when you're in public and people are watching you. When you're at home, it's a very different situation.
That's very applicable. That's very applicable to the question you asked me before about, do these people have a conscience in the media? Do they tell you the truth? And what I found in our reporting is that it's a weird, I'm not a psychologist, so let me just give you the facts and we can talk about it. Like in Connecticut, we did this story on this principal who said, "We don't hire Christians. We don't hire Catholics." He says, "We don't hire people over the age of 30. All this is illegal. You can't discriminate on the basis of age.
Wait, can I ask why he wouldn't want to hire Christians or Catholics?
He talked about this subtle indoctrination program. This is the associate or assistant principal in Greenwich, Connecticut. Okay. The associate principal is in charge of hiring. and he says they tend to be more conservative.
Oh,
And
God,
he
okay.
wants people to vote Democrat. I mean, he says it's like a Saturday Night Live version of a teacher that you or I would cast if we were going to central casting.
Yeah, yeah.
This man says all these things. He does not know he's recorded. And what's interesting about the reaction to it was the teachers union in the state, this is the Education Association, was so obsessed with ensuring their members were not talking to anybody and talking about what they believe. And I find a lot of parallels between the example you just gave about the Soviet Union, because they're almost obsessed with not being in a place where someone can have a conversation with them about what it is that they believe. Rather than reform the behavior, it's about making it more difficult for someone to have access to them.
Yes.
I saw this yesterday with Mark Kelly. I was just in Arizona. We did a story on Mark Kelly, the senator running in Arizona, and we did a video about his staffer privately saying the things like, well, tell the voters that you're pro-life, even though that we're not. We have to deceive them in order to win. This is what, the sort of thing she says privately. So word gets out that I'm in Arizona, and Mark Kelly doesn't even show up to his own event for fear that a Project Veritas microphone, this is an open microphone, might be there. So he doesn't even show up. That's how much they fear. I mean, it's
Wait,
remarkable.
James, I'm just imagining he gets the call. He's like, what? James O'Keefe's in town? And he's like, all right, get the spaceship ready. I'm going to the moon for a day.
I'm not even going to show up to my own event because there might be a reporter there. I mean, so they're not, on one hand, the powers that be, are not reforming their behavior. They don't have a conscience. On the other hand, the 88 to 92% of Americans watch all this shit and they go, that's crazy. I'm waking up, whatever the metaphor is, black pill, red pill, who knows what pill. I'm waking up now and I'm seeing this shenanigans and I reject it. While you have the Education Association, let's put them in the 8% of political science. They're the extremists. We've done stories on teachers unions giving payoff to teachers who were allegedly raping a child. They're so ideologically extreme that they'll cover up any abuse, but they only represent the 8%. So I think, again, I'm going back to my premise here that the work that we're trying to do is bringing people together in this country by exposing the lie behind the curtain.
Hey guys, good software delivery gets teams working, keeps projects on track, and customers happy. Bad software delivery confuses teams, stalls projects, and causes customers to run away till there's no customers, and you have to close your business and mine crypto in your friend's backyard. Don't mine crypto in your friend's backyard. Try Pluralsight and bring visibility and predictability to your team's software delivery. Learn more at pluralsight.com/vision.
For 9 years, a man terrorized women across the D.C. region.
The more the victims resisted, the more violent he became.
Breaking into homes and raping his victims before killing a brilliant young scientist in 1998. Then he suddenly stops, leaving police with a lot of clues and one unknown subject.
I'm Paul Wagner. Join me for Unknown Subject, Season 3 of WTOP's American Nightmare podcast series, available October 4th on all podcast platforms.
Let's get back to the show. Was that you guys? I'm 90% sure it was, who had Katie Hobbs on video.
Yes.
Okay. There was this great moment. If people haven't seen it, you have to watch it. Katie Hobbs, who's currently the Democratic nominee for governor in Arizona. She's running neck and neck with Kari Lake, who's been a previous guest on this show. And she's refusing to debate, even though John Fetterman is perfectly comfortable. Well, he wasn't comfortable debating, but he did it. He bit the bullet. And there was this great moment where she's just eating by herself. I don't understand, by the way, how if you're a gubernatorial candidate, you don't even have your family or like a staffer with you. It's just very odd. She's by herself.
This is a very important point you're making. And it's something I've learned in our political reporting in these Senate races, is that it's really funny, particularly Democrats in red states. They can't say what they actually believe.
Right.
So they have this weird Machiavellian strategy. So Hobbs, our reporter, R.C. Maxwell, goes up to her at Lenny's fast food restaurant in Arizona. And she freaks out and she spills her drink and then she runs into the bathroom to hide from him.
But she's running on camera. That's the funniest part.
They always run. Pfizer executive ran away from me as fast as you can possibly imagine. Imagine how bad it must be when there's nothing you can utter that won't make your circumstances worse than they already are.
But here's the thing. Like, if you're a politician, the joke used to be, what's the most dangerous place in Washington? Standing between Chuck Schumer and a camera, right? You're running for governor. There's a mic. This
Right.
is your opportunity to put these Project Veritas jerks in their place. Be like,
Never.
you're lying. This is what I stand for. You guys are terrible, and you're with Carrie Lake, and she's bad for America. And just give your stump speech. And if you know how to monologue, you shouldn't be running for governor.
Because this is an important point. Their whole philosophy relies upon this belief. We're reporting in Arizona yesterday that tell the voters that you are pro-life, even though that you're not. Because, and this is a direct quote, we have to play both sides.
Wow.
So imagine you're one of them and you're working for an organization that believes in that shit. It's an irrational philosophy, by the way. You can only believe X, you can't believe non-X. It's the law of non-contradiction. But this is your life. This is your motto. Yeah. And when someone shines a light on you, there's nothing that you can do. The only thing you can do is apologize and resign or flee. You have those are your only two options. You have to run away, because to engage in conversation is to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
To say anything at all is to damage yourself. And that's the power of cinema verite, right? That's the power of seeing the lips move. They say, there's no conspiracy theories when you can see the person's lips. You can see Hobbes in this video actually saying, I can't say what I believe. I can't go out. I can't talk about what you know what she's saying. And then they say, well, you can say the video is fake and doctored and a double fake, but you're not going to say that under oath.
Right.
You're not going to say that under oath. That's perjury. You're going to impeach your credibility if you say that under oath. And, well, maybe they should sue KEEFE for defamation. They don't sue me for defamation because they lose. Recently, someone sued us for breach of fiduciary duty.
What?
That's not a defamation action. We could talk about that some other time. But they try to backdoor defamation action to that spurious claim. So yeah, I think it goes back to that Soviet Union and I think it's we need people to, that's why behind me it says be brave. We need people to have a conscience, to grow a pair, that work for these federal agencies, these politicians, and to speak out, because I think that's an important thing to do in life.
One of you just brought up these lawsuits that you're subject of. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to these recent rulings against Alex Jones. There was one point the parents were thinking of asking for 2.75 trillion, which is more than the GDP, I believe, of like France or Turkey. Does that affect your work? Is that a concern for you?
I don't know. There are laws against there are defamation laws in this country. You can't say something that's factually untrue. I have to get up to speed on this. I have to read about it. I don't want to comment on something I'm not fully up to speed on. I need to read the documents, and it's almost like I wish I was there, and I probably should have been there. It sounds like a lot of money. If it's untrue what he said, there are consequences for saying things that are untrue with malice in your heart, if that's what he did. And I try not to do that. I try only to report firsthand, participation, observation, evidence that I see and I can verify. And whether there was some conspiracy there is not something I wish to opine upon, really.
When you are getting the Katie Hobbs footage, where she just knocks over her drink, there's this great moment because she looks back, as a human being, you want to clean up the mess you just made. And then you could see her reconsider, like, screw it, I got to flee. And she just leaves it for some worker to clean up after her. When you get footage like that, when you first receive it before you release it, it's just so comical, like a grown woman just running away from a mic and perfectly innocuous questions. It's not like she's, in some murder trial and you're asking her about a murder where she's not allowed to comment on the record, be very deleterious for her. This isn't Casey Anthony. She's actually running actively for governor, and she has a very good shot of getting it. When you get this footage, are you guys in the office just all like cracking up out loud because it's so ridiculous to see visually?
It's a mixture of another day at work. I think a lot of people here, it's almost like a relief that we got it. There are so many, stories. The Pfizer executive running away from me as fast as I remember that one. She was running, her legs are trying to catch up with her arms. It's a comedic, lampoonish video of this woman, a Twitter executive running down the streets of Manhattan. I don't know if you saw that one. That was the most watched video in Project Veritas history. He sprinted away from me for a solid 10 minutes. We were on a wild goose chase throughout the streets of Manhattan. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like, this is what I do. This is what we do. It's a necessary consequence. It's the false dichotomy they put themselves in, by propping up the lies and not having a conscience and telling the truth. I mean, this woman Hobbs, let me tell you something. She is the sitting Secretary of State of Arizona. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And she's running for governor. And for her to run away from RC, hide herself from the African-American reporter like she did, that was the better of the two. This is a good metaphor. Remember when the World Trade Center came down and it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. People were jumping out of the top of the building. Yes. And there was commentary that jumping out of the building was the better of the two options, burn alive or jump out. So you think, what would drive a man to jump out of a building 100 stories to their death? What would drive the Secretary of State of Arizona to run away from an African-American reporter and hide in the bathroom? Because that is the better option than to engage that man in conversation about what she was caught on tape saying. And that's the truth. And that's why it's a relief. Okay, the first thing we do is, hey guys, did we get the footage? Did the batteries die? Did the hidden camera work? Like that's what's going through our minds when this happens, because we know that there's no way for them to win in this false dichotomy.
Obviously, I feel as if you are going to go confront, I don't mean confront in an aggressive way, but just like someone is just sitting around and now you're going to basically be engaging them in an interaction that they would do anything, they'd give up their mother to avoid having. What's the feeling like for you? Is it like, do you have that bit of adrenaline? Do you have that bit of kind of approach anxiety, or is it second nature to you at this point?
I'm a little bit of a thespian. In other words, I like the artistic storytelling aspects of what it is that we do here. And that might surprise people. People in politics tend to pursue power or whatever, informational leverage. I've always approached this job as one of I'm passionate about telling stories. So for me, it's very exciting. It's kind of like a vision come true, almost like you're on a stage and you're telling people a story and you're visually manifesting this thing that is going to happen and you want to execute it flawlessly. So for me, it's like I flip a switch. I've always been a relatively shy, introverted person growing up. But for me, it's just when I get in that moment where I'm got the microphone and we're interviewing the principal who is caught on tape, it just flows. It just works. And I think that's true for a lot of people that work here. They get into this flow where it's an out of body experience when you're confronting these people and you just go into the subconscious of going through the motions. And the nerves may happen prior to, but once you're running down the streets, chasing after the bad guy, you're just on.
Well, it's also, I don't know if this is the right word, but there's some sort of like alpha energy where like you just want to talk to someone and they're literally fleeing from your presence. Perfectly well you're not going to physically harm them. You would never do that in a million years. But the fact that you want to just talk to someone and they have to run as fast as they can away from you, that's something that doesn't really happen to normal people. That is such a move of like this sense of power over this person's life that they have given to you.
Yeah, this was demonstrated in the tape where the principal goes, "This has to stop." Like I'm standing 6 inches away from him, and this guy's looking at his life flash before his eyes, and it's like they're having a brain aneurysm. You could see it on the camera. He goes, "This has to stop. This has to stop. This has to stop." And I said, "What needs to stop?" "This has to stop." And I said, "What?" So I go. "So what are you going to do?" It's just like two guys talking to each other. And you're witnessing this historic moment because he's confronting, and this is a little psychological, perhaps he's confronting his own shadow in the Jungian version of that. He's faced with his own demons. And I think you're right. I think there's a passion, but also an alpha energy for justice. I won't let him get away with this. I will not let him go. And I'm going to stand here with my microphone until he confronts his demons and confesses. And there was one time, maybe more than one, but one I can remember recently in Utah, where a young man, 24-year-old guy working for a Republican congressman, actually almost teared up and said, I'm just going to resign. I have nothing to say for myself. This was wrong, and I'm going to resign. And I think he was young enough where he hadn't yet hit the age of pride, where he was able to confess his sins, so to speak.
Yeah.
But you very rarely see most of the time they double down and go into hiding and sue me.
Have you ever had, I'm sure you have, sorry, but what is the situation where you were most concerned that it was about to get violent? Because I'm sure that's happened at least once.
Good question. There was, I mean, I'm probably forgetting sitting right here, but there was one time, this is in 2015, where I was doing a story on Al Sharpton.
Oh, okay.
And I forgot the name of his organization. He's got a foundation in New York, and my staff will send it to me here in a moment. But I was sitting in, I guess it was a church pew or an auditorium pew, and he was speaking, and I was, doing my thing. I was showing up to try to ask questions, like as reporters do, and a bunch of his bodyguards circled around me. And Al Sharpton's giving the speech before, I think it's National Action Network in the Bronx or Harlem or one of these places. And while he's speaking, he goes, "Oh, he's here. Oh, they're here, and we know that they're here." And I forgot the words he used, but we're going to let them know that we're here. And people started to descend around me, and I could feel the fear because I had no bodyguards. I had one other guy that was, a cameraman or something, and I was like, "Oh boy." But most of the time, Mike, the violence comes from my own government. Most of the greatest threats against me were from my own government. I swear to God, it's the FBI arrested me in 2010 for asking a senator the wrong question. The FBI raided my reporters' homes and myself a year ago with guns and battering rams. I've been detained by the police a number of times. Recently in Connecticut, when I asked that Connecticut principal questions, the local police came and escorted the man to his vehicle and threatened me with arrest if I did not leave the public parking lot immediately. So most of the so-called fears or the threats against Project Veritas are not from private people engaged in violent threats. It's because our own government views us as a target, and that's something we've had to deal with.
Hey guys, Your Welcome is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of compare rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try. You might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare. So it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates, quote at progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Let's get back to the show. I do want to discuss that raid, which obviously made very big news. Before we get to your perspective on that, can you confirm, was there any hand-wringing on the part of any corporate journalist that you can think of that someone who is an independent journalist, whether you disagree with him or not, is getting raided by the FBI?
Did people think it was wrong?
Yes. Did anyone speak out in your behalf?
Yeah, almost everyone did, except the New York Times. The New York Times is really the only institution that didn't really condemn it. They didn't admonish the behavior. We had the ACLU come out to defend us. That oftentimes makes people on the right have a stroke. They can't believe it. The American Civil Liberties Union is writing letters on our behalf to the government. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, like Josh Gerstein and Andrea Mitchell and Wolf Blitzer, came out and wrote letters trying to unseal the probable cause that was used to obtain the search warrant. We've had Ed Snowden's organization, Society of Professional Journalists, Committee to Protect Journalists. All these groups came out and said, this is wrong. I mean, we had law professors come out, this is wrong. There are laws and regulations in the United States. If you're going to raid a press organization, first of all, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has to personally approve that. Second of all, there has to be conversations with the attorneys for the press prior to executing the raid. Third of all, there's a Privacy Protection Act that protects these sorts of things. There's federal rules of criminal procedure. There are all these things that have to happen before you take battering rams to newspaper people and press organizations. But the U.S. attorneys in New York, this is federal, Southern District of New York, we submitted a motion for a special master after the raid. Special master, if you don't know, it's an independent judge that can go through the materials so that we don't just trust the FBI to not look at private things they shouldn't. and the arguments the government was making, because the judge was like, well, there are First Amendment issues here. And the government, oh no, there's no that. James O'Keefe is not a journalist. And they said the reason, brace yourself for this. Federal prosecutors told the federal judge that we're not journalists because we don't get permission from the people that we video record.
Holy
Federal
crap.
prosecutor actually said that. And again, that goes back to this idea of doublethink from George Orwell's 1984, that they just say things that are so utterly irrational and are so self-evidently absurd, but they actually wrote this and the judge ruled against them. And the federal judge ruled, no, there are First Amendment issues here and potential journalistic privileges. But they would argue that we're not press. And on that issue, may or may not go to the United States Supreme Court before your honor, whether this is a First Amendment issue. Clearly and obviously it is. And people in the government came to us, and that sort of confidential material exists on our devices, on our phones. And that's what the federal government, when they psychologically raped us and took our stuff at gunpoint and then leak it to the New York Times. This is the sort of evil dystopia that America has not yet seen. It's a Rubicon that hasn't yet been crossed. I realize the FBI has targeted people, but when they start pointing guns at journalists just because they don't like me, I think that's a new Rubicon that we've seen. And people on the left, people at the ACLU came to our defense. Credit to them, by the way.
Let's break down this raid insofar as you're able to speak about it. What was this like in the middle of the night? Were you at home? Like, what went through your head? This must clearly have been the most scariest experience of your life.
The raid itself wasn't, but it was at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. They banged on the door, really loud. And I think that banging sound from the feds is something in nightmares. It certainly is as loud as you can imagine. Fists pounding your door. The apartment is shaking. I live in a small apartment. And my first thought was they're here, because 2 days prior they had raided my two colleagues.
Okay. So you're expecting it, or you're aware of the possibility, strong possibility.
Not fully expecting it, but when the banging happened, I knew that it was likely them, because
that's
they
kind of a relief.
Colleagues.
Okay.
And I think it may have been, for example, some type of attempt to. I'm speculating here, but I think it's important that we try to figure out what's going on. Maybe it was an attempt for them to go through my devices to see if I deleted something, right? I don't delete anything, but they were trying to catch me in process crime, because we don't know what's in the affidavit. We don't know what the probable cause was that allowed the judge to stamp this thing, and they don't want you to see it. But the law of the United States says if you're going to raid a journalist, you have to make the probable cause public, because society's interest in journalists not having their phone seized outweighs whatever marginal interest the government has in keeping that probable cause secret. That's the law of the land. So they broke the law, and they're not unsealing that affidavit. But for all we know, the probable cause was Mr. O'Keefe is deleting evidence. We need to raid him to find him deleting evidence. So they come to my apartment. And the first thing they do is I open the door, I run to my door, and I'm about to open this 6 a.m. and I'm thinking, am I going to get shot?
Yeah, of course.
But I open the door and I say, I'm opening the door now, so they know. And I open the door, and there's some 10 federal agents with flashlights and big bright white lights and vests, and they have a battering ram like Vikings, about to break my door down, and they throw me against the wall, put me in handcuffs, and then the first thing I think is I'm under arrest.
Right? Of course.
And the first thing you would think, people may not know this, but when the feds execute a search warrant, they do put you and your loved ones in handcuffs. I did not know that, and probably most people don't. So you're sitting in handcuffs, and you think I'm under arrest, and then as you're standing,
I got to interrupt you, because you were complying. You were saying I'm opening the door, so there's no reason for them to throw you against the wall. They could have said, turn around, I'm going to cuff you, and you would have complied.
Right. So they put you in handcuffs, they put you against the wall, you're sort of facing this wall, and you're standing there, and I guess what runs through my head at that moment in time is I'm about to go through some ordeal, like I'm going to be processed and put in a cage, arraigned, and charged with a felony. That's actually happened to me before. I'm one of the few men you'll ever meet or know who's been put in handcuffs twice by the FBI in 2 separate matters, and I'm an American journalist. So I'm standing there and I'm thinking, okay, here we go again.
Yep.
And that's when the fear sets in, because I thought to myself, well, what the hell do they have me on? Because it's one thing if you've broken the law, if you've done something wrong, right? You think, okay, well, they caught me on that. But when you haven't done anything illegal, it's probably more terrifying, because you start to imagine what these people are willing to do. What are they willing to lie? Things cross your mind. Are they putting child porn in my, are they putting cocaine in my underwear drawer? I don't know what they're doing. And they put me in a room, and then they raid the other room, and then they put me in the other room, and they raid the room before, and they don't let you see what they're doing. They showed me a warrant.
Before you get to that, because I read a book about the guy, I forget his name. He wrote some book called It Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do. And he was raided. He was dying of cancer because he had written about how using marijuana was helping him with his pain. And they raided his house, and they just made it a complete mess. So when they're raiding your space, are they just trashing it just for the sake of trashing it?
I'll be fair to them. They didn't trash it. They lifted things up and they put them back down. So it was, and I don't, all I have are books and clothes.
Okay, sure.
So they lifted the books up and put them, they were putting back in a different way, and rifled through things, etc. But there isn't much stuff where I live, and they did not raid our office because our office was, I'm back in it now, but our building was destroyed by a hurricane. So we had a Book of Job month where our office was destroyed by the hurricane. The Fed seized on the opportunity to strike me when I was down, and they went after me and my apartment. So to finish the story, they showed me the warrant, and they looked at the document, and it said, now with a warrant, it's something that you may have done or something that you have evidence about somebody else may have done. It's an incredibly aggressive thing for the feds to execute a search warrant. And it said transportation of stolen material across state lines, misprison of a felony, and accessory after the fact. Do you know what it's called, Mike, when the Washington Post and New York Times transport stolen documents across state lines?
Journalism?
It's called Tuesday.
Oh, yeah.
Or Thursday.
Yeah.
Sometimes Sunday. I'm sure they did it today. And when they email stolen documents across state lines, well, that even happens on the hour, every hour. It's established Supreme Court precedent that you can receive information from somebody else, even if that information was stolen. I didn't steal it. We didn't know it was stolen, even if it was, which it apparently wasn't. A journalist has a right to publish information stolen by somebody else. It's a journalist's duty to follow up. So when we got this diary in 2020, this is Ashley Biden's diary, we ended up trying to determine its authenticity by calling Joe Biden for comment, which is what journalists are supposed to do.
Yeah.
When we reached out to Ashley Biden for comment, Ashley Biden lawyer, a woman named Roberta Kaplan, forwarded that correspondence to the Southern District of New York and said, go after these guys. You know, and that's the sort of corruption there that we were testifying about before Congress members this year. This is a constitutional case of enormous proportions.
Yep.
It is terrifying. I would be inhuman to say that I wasn't scared. But I think there's a lot of hope in that these liberal groups were defending us, and hopefully we form some consensus around the fact that this is wrong.
Are you black-pilled or white-pilled about the future of America?
Define those terms.
Black-pilled means it's a wrap, folks. It doesn't matter who you're going to get in the White House. This is either going to be a long defeat or a fast one, but we're done. And a white pill is, it is possible we will lose, but it's impossible that we must lose.
White pill means I'm sorry, say that. White pill means
it's possible that we'll lose, but it's impossible that we must lose.
It's impossible that we must lose. Interesting. I would say that I'm an optimist, and I believe in the principles, some of the principles behind this country. You know, we pledge allegiance to the flag when we're young, and we believe in this idea of equality before the law, that Lady Justice is supposed to be blind. The First Amendment is the right, I think, that protects all others, and people have to have access to information. So I believe that if people knew what was going on in this country And my job is to find that out and give it to them. There is much hope indeed. And let me give you an example of hope, because I feel like when I speak before audiences now, it's like I'm like the psychotherapist and the counselor, not the journalist, but I get it. After the FBI raid, a whistleblower in the FBI came to us. And remember how I told you that story about the prosecutor said we're not news media?
Right.
Well, the FBI whistleblower showed us a document inside internal computer systems identifying us as news media.
Ooh.
And this person went on the record with me and spoke to me. We cloaked this person, disguised their voice, and published the document. And the FBI went on their vicious internal fishing expedition to find out who done it, who gave the document to James O'Keefe.
But you know what's funny? Like if they were decent agents of the state, the investigation would be like, how did we lie and say that they're not media? That's who they should be looking for.
But how inspirational is it that someone, and only a few people have access to this thing. In fact, out of the 10 agents in my apartment, you can almost tell that on some of their faces, they were like, whoa, this is a little bit Germany-like. You could even tell that they felt uncomfortable. And I think that we have to be hopeful. We have to believe, because unless you believe something, you can't do it. If you believe that it's impossible, it's not. If you believe that it is possible, you will. And I have people out there in the government that come to me to this day. Federal people in the federal government come to Project Veritas and speak on the record. I don't even know if it's a non-disclosure agreement per se, but they're federal employees, and they sit down and they talk to me and they show me private information because they believe in something greater than themselves. And I know that that's like 0.0001% of the American population, but 0.001 out of 400 million is quite a few people.
Yeah.
My job is to find those people and to tell their stories and to corroborate it with our undercover people to go out there and get the information. That gives me hope. It gives me a purpose to live. Because if you don't believe in, if you're gonna be black-pilled and believe nothing matters, and there's no point to anything. But I do believe that we'll turn the tide, because when people are pushed too far, they tend to push back. I don't mean in a violent way. I mean voting. I mean believing. When they see the courage, it inspires people. And the FBI whistleblower who came to us, well, guess what? A number of other federal whistleblowers came to us after that and was inspired by what that person did. I can't philosophize courage. I can't persuade people to be courageous. We can do it, and people will follow. And that's what keeps me going. I mean, that's what gives me purpose is this story we have that we haven't released yet is absolutely dynamite. It's so big. I can't even talk about what it is or who it is, but this person is willing to give up their everything, their pension, for the public's right to know. And that is more powerful than propaganda.
James, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
I think you talking to me about the Soviet Union and I think that's very fascinating to me. I'd love to talk to you more offline about that. And, Samizdat and Solzhenitsyn and the private lie. I think the Soviet Union is fascinating, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from it. So I wish we could talk about that more, and I'd love to read any information you have on that topic offline.
You are welcome.